Hey guys, let's go ahead and finish. Actually, I guess we're not going to finish it, but let's go ahead and do lecture number 2 on population evolution. I'm going to share my screen here for a PowerPoint. Okay. All right. So we talked about the definitions for natural selection, for evolution. I talked about the fact that you could, fall on a scale or when it comes to what you believe about evolution and that it's fine. What else did we go over? Kind of a little bit about Charles Darwin, talked about how natural selection works. Now I'm going to give you some of the evidence to support evolution as a theory, okay? And I know that evolution often gets taught as a fact, but it does remain a theory. And so I'm going to give you some of the evidence to support that. The first, hang on, why am I on the wrong? There we go, sorry about that. The first line of evidence for evolution is something called homology. It refers to homologous traits. And I'm going to write notes on these PowerPoints so you can write these notes down as well. Hang on. So homologous traits are traits that are similar because of a shared ancestor. Okay. Basically what this means is that somewhere down the line, the evolutionary line, organisms would have had the same common ancestor, okay? So the example, there's a lot of examples, but one of the best ones is, sorry, me picking something up off the floor, is the bones in the appendages for humans, cats, whales, bats. You can notice that the bones have been color-coded. So the purple or lavender one is the humerus, the radius is orange, the ulna is kind of a tan color, the carpals are yellow, metacarpals are green, and the phalanges are blue. So you can see that in the forearm, or I'm sorry, the arm of a human, but then that same arrangement of bones is also found in the leg of a cat. It's also found in a whale's flipper and in the wing of a bat. So these are all mammals, and it's believed that because of these similarities, even though the uses for these appendages is very different, it's believed that all of these organisms came from a common ancestor, and that's why we have the arrangement of bones that we do, okay? This one is not part of the evidence for evolution. I'm showing you the difference between analogous and homologous traits. Okay. So this, out of the slides I'm showing you, this one is not evidence for evolution. Again, showing you the difference between analogous and homologous traits. So homologous traits are because of a common ancestor, and analogous traits are due to a similar need. Due to similar need based on a shared environment. Okay, so in other words, sharks, penguins, and dolphins all live in the water. I mean, penguins obviously are to a different extent. than the shark and the dolphin, and yet they all have these similar structures. Shark has a fin. The penguin uses its wing to be able to do the same type of swimming motions in water, and then dolphins have flippers. These have different bone structures and are not believed to come from a common ancestor. Rather, it's thought that their environment, which is water, is what led to the development of these traits that are similar but not the same. Okay. Homology, shared ancestor. Analogy, shared environment, but not shared ancestry. All right, continuing with evidence for evolution. So we've gone over homology. This is something called, as you can see across the top, comparative embryology. And it's basically what it looks like it is. It's comparing the embryo stages or the embryonic stages of different species. As you can see, it's labeled across the top. So starting on the left, we have a fish, then salamander, a tortoise, then a chick. Then we have a pig, a cat, a rabbit, and finally a human. The arrow on the right is showing the early stage of development through late stage of development prior to birth. And you can see that the early stage of development for all of these different organisms are incredibly similar, right? They all has the tail, if you will. A lot of very similar structures. And then of course, as development continues, you're able to see, especially for the fish and the salamander, that that's not going to be human. But the tortoise and the chick still have a lot of similarities. And then of course, if you look, between the pig and the calf and the rabbit and the human, still very, very much alike. Finally, in the latest stage shown here, you can tell what's going to be human and what isn't. But when it comes to embryology, a lot of these species are so similar that it takes specialists in the field to be able to identify what they're looking at early on. So the point with comparative embryology is if, most organisms, if all organisms didn't come from a common ancestor far, far back, then how come we have these similarities? Okay. Okay. Actually, I'm just going to add it right here. I'm going to add, like I said, this is going to be a separate note because I didn't make a slide for this. So I'm just going to write it here. Another thing that's used for evidence for evolution is the fossil record, which also is what it sounds like. Fossils, right? Fossils that have been taken out of the ground and dated, like as far as it's given an age, approximate age, based on a bunch of things, everything from the layer of soil that it's found in, how far down that layer is, to carbon dating from any organic remains in the soil, things like that. So the fossil record can show changes in a species over time. Actually, I'm just going to make this broader, changes in organisms. So in other words, if you can identify something as being, human remains, right? And you can identify them at a certain age, you can see how humanity has changed over the past several thousand to tens of thousands of years. Okay. Let's move away from this now and go to dogs. Yes, can you believe it? We're actually looking at dogs in this lecture because what we're going to be looking at, as I write this note for us, actually I'm going to do it down here, is artificial selection. We've already talked about natural selection, where nature is going to be what selects the traits that are best suited to the environment. In artificial selection, humans select the traits that we find most desirable. Okay. All right, that's why I use dogs for this. Although we can do it in many fields, because farming is another huge area where we've done a lot of artificial selection, selecting for fruits and vegetables that we think have the most desirable traits as far as size, color, longevity, hardiness, things like that. But dogs are more fun to look at than vegetables. I don't know. So this is a bulldog, I believe. And you can take a second to look at the differences in the then and now. A lot of these thens were 100 plus years ago, that are these pictures that are taken. So we've got at least a century of artificial selection happening. For me, one of the things I noticed the most about this is that the today version of this breed is a whole lot heavier and stockier. The legs are a little shorter, definitely not as slender as the then version. And then of course we have a whole lot more wrinkles happening in the face than we did in the past, okay? And that's not coincidence. It's because the way that this dog looks today, this is like the AKC type standard for what this breed ideally should look like. So these traits were selected by humans over, a century or so that the dog would look this way. Okay, that's the whole point of like the pure breeding thing. It's to make sure that you get a purebred, that you breed with another purebred of the same breed, to ensure that those traits are what get passed on, and that it hasn't been muddied by, some other random breed or a mix of breeds, that you're not getting a mutt. Okay. This boxer. Tail is obviously a whole lot shorter. The head is a little smaller. The snout is shorter, the nose. It's a little bit leaner. So again, take a minute and kind of see what you notice as being the differences between these two dogs then and now. Oh shoot, I can't remember this dog. I think it's a terrier. It's a terrier, I think. Or a mutant, I'm not sure which, because as you can see, it has lost the definition between kind of the top of the head and the nose. It is a terrier. I just can't think of the, oh well, maybe you know what it is. Really kind of a drastic difference here. The dog is shorter, squatter, rounder. Like all of the dog has softer lines with body parts less, not really distinguishable, but less sharp. Just everything kind of flows into the next feature. German Shepherd is interesting. I prefer the then version of this dog, or this breed, I should say. They are a little bit squatter. The back is more curved now, tail's longer. The coat is slightly different. So I just like how the then version looks of the German Shepherd, but this is another example of the then and now. Okay, again, artificial selection. I think I've got to switch over. I do, I've got to switch over to my notepad. So for the moment, we're done looking at dogs, sorry. Okay, let me give you some more terms. So we've talked about evolution, we've talked about the evidence for evolution, we just talked about natural and artificial selection. Now we're going to talk about key points of evolution that are often overlooked. or just not understood. But they're really, really important, okay? Yes, they're gonna be on quizzes and finals. First off, populations evolve, individuals do not. This is a big deal. If you sprout wings right now, right, and you don't successfully reproduce to pass that trait on, and your offspring don't successfully reproduce to pass that trait on, it kind of doesn't matter in an evolutionary standpoint if you have wings or not. It's like, congratulations for you, but individuals don't evolve, populations do. That means that the genes for those wings have to be passed on, okay? Second, evolution only works on traits that can be inherited, okay? So if you have dyed your hair, if you have piercings, if you have tattoos, those things aren't going to get passed on. If you've dyed your hair, blue right now, and you have a baby with your hair dyed blue, you're not going to have a blue-haired baby. If you have tattoos right now and you have a baby, you're not going to have a baby with tattoos. You're not going to give birth to one like that. And that's because those traits have changed, or are changes on our phenotype, our physical appearance only. They're not actually changes to our genetic makeup, okay? So if we all worked out until we looked like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, we would not give birth to babies that look like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, as far as like, they would not have giant muscles, okay? Because again, that's not a genotype thing, it's a phenotype. And genotype can play into muscle development. My point is though, if you've worked out to change your phenotype to that extent, that doesn't mean you're giving birth to a baby that also comes out all bulky and muscly. That would be terrifying. But only traits that can be inherited, only traits that are in the genes. Finally, evolution does, I'm gonna actually make this capital, not lead to perfectly adapted individuals. There's this idea of a utopian society where humanity has reached the pinnacle of its evolutionary journey. It is perfected, it is, glorious. And I'm not even talking about like on an after this life type of level. I'm talking about mortality, that humans have adapted to the point that they've reached this level. Evolution doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way for a couple of reasons, but one of the biggest is our environment is constantly changing. Our environment is not stable. Therefore, we have to continue adapting to the environment. You can be well adapted for your current environment, but once that changes, you have to adapt to keep up with it, okay? I use the Ice Age again as one of, the most recent Ice Age again, as one of those examples. The organisms like saber-toothed cats and woolly mammoths and actually everything that's in the Ice Age movies, they were really well adapted to living in those temperatures and with that type of vegetation. They were built for it on every way. They had adapted to be successful in that environment, okay? But then when their environment changed, they weren't perfectly adapted, right? And they couldn't adapt fast enough to prevent extinction. So evolution does not lead to perfection, okay? All right, we've got a couple of sources of genetic evolution. Again, genetic because it has to be passed down in the genes. We've gone over these for the most part, but mutation and then sexual reproduction. Because we know that meiosis, we've gone over that whole thing about how different alleles are passed into egg and sperm cells and then the different combinations possible in fertilization. And so you have all of these new combinations that are presented in sexual reproduction. If everything simply replicated by cloning, like through mitosis, nothing would evolve because it would literally just be one copy of the same thing, 1,000,000 times over. Let's go over a couple more definitions. Let's talk about the gene pool. You hear this word from time to time. This is all of the copies of every type of allele that exists within a population. Okay. So the gene pool is referring to all the alleles, all the different kinds that everybody in a population has. Pretty basic, okay? Then we have gene, actually before I do that one, let's do genetic drift. So genetic drift is a change in the gene pool of a population due to chance, okay? Meaning that it's not a case of artificial selection. The gene pool for dog breeds has changed over time, but not due to chance because we made it that way. So genetic drift is something that's going to happen after, for random reasons. It can happen because of an environmental change. It can happen because of spread of a disease. It can happen because of overhunting and predation. There's all kinds of environmental, natural disasters, fires, things that can happen that changes the gene pool of a population. Normally that type of change means that you're reducing the genetic diversity because you're losing individuals. And as you lose individuals, you lose all the alleles that they had. So the genetic diversity of a population can decrease because of genetic drift. We'll look at a couple of types of genetic drift. The first is called the bottleneck effect. And this one is reduction in population size, which creates a severe reduction in the gene pool. And again, I gave some examples of what can cause the bottleneck effect. We talked about natural disaster, what else did I say, guys? Disease, changes to the environment. I said that phonetically, environment. So any of these things can produce a severe reduction in the size of the population. Then we have another type of genetic drift, which is called the founder effect. Basically what happens here is you've got a big population and a small part of that big population breaks off and they go someplace else and do their own thing, taking all of their alleles with them. Because they are a smaller group than the great big population they left, they have fewer alleles and less genetic diversity than the big group did, which means that there's only fewer alleles that can be passed on within that community, okay? Okay. The founder effect is something that can happen, and actually all of these can happen and have happened in human populations as well as animal populations. The founder effect is interesting because I don't know if any of you have heard of Martha's Vineyard. It's a little island, kind of, off the coast of Massachusetts, not terribly far from Boston. And today it's home to many of the wealthy and elite. A lot of politicians and actors in the world's wealthy have vacation homes there. But that's not how Martha's Vineyard was started. It was actually started by a couple of families who had a congenital, geez, you guys, I can't think today, that were deaf due to genetics. Okay, so it wasn't an acquired hearing loss. Genetically, they were deaf. Well, because this was a small population that moved to this island and began to mix together and to have kids, that gene that caused deafness skyrocketed in the population because there weren't other genes there to mix with. And so Martha's Vineyard became a deaf colony just because of the disproportionately high number of individuals who were deaf there when you compared it to the mainland. So anyway, the founder effect is something that you can see all over islands. It's another big thing that you can find in human and animal and plant populations on islands, because it's a smaller group that populated the island, taking the alleles with them, breaking off from the larger group. So you have a much denser concentration of the alleles in that population. It's very distilled. It's not watered down by all the other alleles of a larger population. Okay. What else do I have? A couple more things. Hang it, guys. All right. Sexual selection is also what it sounds like. This is a form of natural selection. So it's not, this is not artificial selection. It's a form of natural selection where individuals with certain traits are more likely to be selected as a mate. So sexual selection is interesting because it's usually, but not always, but usually, it's usually the female that drives sexual selection. In other words, it's usually the female's choice as of who she chooses for a mate. And that is why there are all kinds of crazy mating rituals in the animal kingdom. It's because the guys are trying to display their best traits and trying to tell the ladies, hey, you want to reproduce with me because my traits are freaking awesome and our children are going to survive if you mate with me. If you mate with that guy over there, your children are probably going to die. I'm just saying. Okay. Let me see if I can actually find, because I would have put this in if I had thought about it, but I didn't. Okay, so some examples. Peacock. Here in the front is a female peacock. Let me move this out of the way. You guys can't see what I'm sharing anyway because I forgot to share my screen. I will do it now. Share. Okay, let's try that again. Please just work. A second to move some stuff around so I can access what I need. Okay. Female peacocks are in the front. They are rather boring to look at. And then there's the male, and he is clearly trying to impress the ladies with his stunning tail, with his feathers that look like lots and lots of eyes to scare off predators. They're not really paying any attention to him, but this is one example. Males tend to be brighter, larger, and stand out in animal species because the females are often the ones that stay with the young. And so their colors are much more subdued as camouflage, basically. They can kind of blend in with their environment while the males are out there like, oh, you know, look at me. Okay. Let's see if I can find another one. There is a lizard that does some crazy stuff, but I gotta find him. A couple of bucks who are going to clash. Actually, these guys look young, and they're probably just eating. Maybe they're going to fight or play. But the display of power, strength, prowess, that they can be undefeated, to show the women that they are the strongest. And again, your offspring will survive if you have children with me. Of course, you have to be careful when you put in these particular terms because you actually get pictures of that. Do you want to see a picture of a mongoose mating? Well, you can see it. Mating displays. Bactrian camel mating display. I don't know what this is. Oh my. You know, they're not attractive normally. I'm not really sure what the female Bactrian camel sees in the male, but to each his own. See this spider, as the spiders aren't disgusting enough. This is one of my favorites. This guy right here. Normally, this lovely skin pouch that he has is tucked underneath in its normal size and you can't really see it. But when it's time to pick up a lady, he puffs it up. Like, hey, look at this, right? Right? Impressive. That's right, your kids could have this. Oh my gosh, this is my other favorite, bird of paradise. Here he is. These are feathers, and obviously it looks like it has little eyes in the back. Also helps with distraction. This is hilarious. They have videos, and if I'd looked it up beforehand, so I wasn't wasting time, I would show it to you. But it prances. I don't really know how else to describe what it does to try to get the female's attention. So not only does it do this lovely thing, but it's got this little hoppy prancy. There, did you like that? Did you like my dance? And I stored it. A hoppy, prancy, dancy thing that it does to try to get the female's attention. And most of the time, they're being ignored. It's hilarious. All right. My point in all of this is that since females, there, see, you can't see them dancing. Look up the video of them dancing. Since the females are the ones that tend to select the males are the ones that have this bright coloration and tend to try to attract female attention. In class, we would be talking about this a little bit when it comes to humans. And if we think that it is the women that are, you know, human females, if human females drive sexual selection as strongly as happens in the rest of the animal kingdom. And of course, there's all kinds of different opinions on that, which is super interesting. And then we usually talk about what types of mating displays you can find amongst people of both sexes, and that also is pretty hilarious. So sadly, we won't be having that conversation, but it's funny, right? All right. Let me go to my last points here. All right, so when it comes to natural selection, there's 3 different possibilities. Stabilizing selection, directional selection, and then our text actually refers to this as disruptive instead of diversifying. Disruptive selection. Okay, So when natural selection happens, we can either have a stabilizing effect, whereas you can see the original population in the blue line had kind of, there's more diversity in this. And stabilizing selection picks something that's going to be pretty much down the middle, okay, of the traits that are available. That means that it's going to favor an intermediate phenotype. So this would have been kind of one side, this would have been the other side when it comes to phenotypes. Stabilizing selection is going to pick the one right in the middle. Then we have directional selection, and directional selection favors an extreme phenotype. So in this selection with our winged moths, in this example, I mean, the original population here was in the blue line, and moths that had this darker wing, there weren't as many of them. They were on this side, probably on the descending side of this, right? It means there are fewer individuals that had this. However, after directional selection, there are now more individuals that have this darker or extreme phenotype. Disruptive selection, the original population, as you can see, kind of down the middle. But in disruptive selection, it chooses the extremes over the middle phenotypes, okay? So this is kind of like the balance between two or more contrasting phenotypes, right? So again, the original was kind of just a down the middle, but after disruptive selection, you have both extremes being more common than that original middle phenotype. Okay, there we go. That's the end of this second lecture. I only have one more for you on this, and it will be shorter. So I'll see you for that one in a minute.